Hi there folks, thanks for joining me. Today I'm going to show you how I built an event registration system. I use Microsoft Forms to provide a list of available events which the user can select one or many of. And once they've made their selection and submission, a Power Automate will trigger. It'll add those users to the specific event and then send them an invite and an email. So without further ado, let's jump on to our demonstration. So first of all, here we are in our Microsoft form, and I have a single question asking the end user to book their sessions for the month for the Power Platform Learning. So we've got 5 sessions in total, and I've turned on multiple answers. So the user can select one or many of the answers, potentially even all 5 if they wish to attend all 5 of these sessions. And we'll take that response from that single question and we will loop through those responses and we'll invite that user to however many of these events they've chosen to select. Now, because this is an internal form, I'm using the email address of the logged on user, but equally, if we were to set up the form so that anyone can respond, even out with the organization, you could include a question here that asks them for their email address. And upon them supplying an email address, you could use that email address to then invite them to the event. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an internal invitation. It can also be used for external invites too. So one of the important things to note here is that the answers we have should be unique. And I made the mistake earlier on when I was building my proof of concept that I called 2 of my events Power Automate. Ideally, I would make the beginning or at least prefix your events with an event ID to make them easier to find when you're filtering within the Power Automate flow. So this will become more obvious when I walk my way through the flow that I've built. If we jump onto our Outlook calendar, I've configured my 5 events, and if we jump into the one of them here and just go into the edit, some important things to maybe consider is when you build the event, is it going to be a Teams meeting or not? So when you first build it, you have a little switch to configure it as a Teams meeting. But some of the more important features, I think anyway at least, do you want there to be a response from the user that you invite? Do you want them to allow forwarding? Now I'd suggest no, you don't want to allow forwarding because you don't want attendees that haven't requested access to this event to attend, and maybe for confidentiality you want to hide the attendee list. So that's how I've configured my particular events here. Then if we jump onto our cloud flow, and not surprisingly I'm using the when a new response is submitted. And one of the important things to note here is that you must turn off concurrency. Now I think this is actually by default on this particular trigger, but if it's not, make sure you have turned it off. And the reason for that will become clear, but we are going to be updating an existing event that we've configured in our Outlook calendar. If we have concurrency turned on, we potentially have a clash of updates occurring to an event, and then may lose some of the important information, lose some of our attendees. So using the, let's just cancel that, sorry. Using the same form, we will then get the response details using the response ID from that trigger. And then purely just for information, I've included the answers from the question in a compose action so we can see them. So this is actually returned as a string, albeit it is an array, and we will use a JSON expression in order to convert this string into a usable array later on. And then in order to get the events that we have in our Outlook calendar, I use the get events action, and you'll note that I've got an OData filter here, which is filtering the start date based on the date being greater than today's date in the format and that's just ultimately to ensure that the events that I'm retrieving are current, they're after today's date, and it will make that particular action run a lot quicker because we're not querying that whole calendar for all historic events. So jumping into my apply to each, this is where I mentioned we'll be using the JSON expression. So this takes the answers, which is a string from the Microsoft form, and converts it into a usable array. And we'll now be able to loop through all of the answers that are given to us by the end user. So if the end user ticks one of those boxes, this apply to each will run once. If they tick 3, of course, it will run 3 times. And this is now where the importance of having unique answers in our form and unique subjects become incredibly important, because this step is relatively straightforward if that's the case. So using the values or the array that's returned from the get events action that we have up here, we're then going to check if the current item, which is based on this array of our answers, so basically if our answer, which in this case here, Power BI 9th of August 10 to 4, or 10 to 2, sorry, if it contains the subject, which is the subject from this array from the get events, and if we look at our subject, Power BI is the name of the subject, then we will return a result within that filter. And because we've used unique values, we know that we'll only get one match, which is why in my next action, you'll note that I've used the first expression, which will return the first object from that filter array. And all we're looking to do here is get the ID. Now you might be thinking, why am I using get event when we've already used get events? Well, I noticed from a forum post that the get events doesn't return all the parameters of an event, and it's extremely important that we include all these values when we update an event. Otherwise, we could end up with some of these values becoming null and then creating unexpected results. So a particular example, if we're just going to have a look at this update event action here, we have things like the reminder value is the reminder on, show if you're busy or out of the office and such like, is a response requested. If you don't fill these things in, and actually more importantly, the body, which includes the Teams invite, if we don't fill these things in, then you lose them when this action is called. And when I was looking at the content of the get events, some of these values are actually empty. So that's why I've used the get event action in order to retrieve that event in full and then use those dynamic values in the update event action. So very much like the get event action here and using the first ID that's retrieved from the filter array above, I use that same ID in the update event, and then I supply things like the subject, the start time, the end time, which are all from this get event action. But the really important one here is the required attendees. So you think about this, every time this flow runs, we're updating that list of attendees. And this is why it's important that this flow cannot run concurrently. Because what we want to do is we want to get a list of those required attendees from the get events, and then we want to add on our responders email. So you'll see there that I've got a comma separated value with the responders email afterwards. And so that will allow the email to be appended to that required attendees list. The all-important body, like I mentioned earlier, which includes the meeting invite if we've turned on Teams meetings, and then some of the other settings like the location reminder and such like. Now in my particular example, I have got response requested turned on, so it's yes. And so what that will do is it will generate an email to the user once they sign up to that event. I do also have an extra action here, sending an email, so an extra summary to that responder to say that they have been signed up to a particular event and that it's also been added to their calendar. But this is an optional action. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to jump into another user that I've got set up. So I've got a user here called Dave, and he's logged onto Office 365 and is currently in the form. and he's going to attend the Power BI and the Power Virtual Agent event. And if we have a quick look at his calendar, you can see here that the calendar is currently empty, and also in terms of their email, they have no emails in their inbox there. So we'll just jump back to our session, we'll hit the submit button, and hopefully within a few seconds or so, that flow will run. It will get a list of all the events. It will go through that array of the 2 answers that I've submitted, and it will then invite Dave to these 2 events that he's selected. And in addition to that, he'll get 2 emails for both events, one that's generated from the invite asking for a response, and another that is the optional email that I spoke about with that summary email to let them know that they've now been invited. So let's just jump into my email. Oh, so we do now have the emails. If I just jump back into my calendar, and I need to jump into August because of course the events are in August. So here we go, we've got the Power BI invite, and we've also got the Power Virtual Agents invite. And if we have a look at those emails, you can see here that we have the automatically generated email that's asking them do they want to take part in the event, but also the optional one that I've sent via the final action to let them know that it's been added to their calendar. And similarly for the Power Virtual Agents, they have both of those emails too. So if I jump back onto my browser, we'll have a quick look at the run history and see what that looks like. So when a new response is submitted, get the response details, and then you can see why I used the compose action, because it shows you here the 2 values in what looks like an array, but it's a string, so that's why we need to use that JSON expression. We get all the events that are after today's date. So if I just open up the raw outputs, you can see there all my events. We've got the Power Apps event, the Power Virtual Agents event, the Automate 1 and 2, and also the Power BI. And then using the apply to each, we can see that 2 loops have occurred. And the first loop is based on the Power BI event, so it's gone through the whole array of events that we have from that Outlook get events action, but returned just the single Power BI event. And if we have a look at the next one, it's returned the Power Virtual Agents event. If we then look at get events, you can see here that when we've returned the Power Virtual Agents event, we're getting the event details of the Power Virtual Agents event, and that will return all the start times, end times, as well as all the other data that's required or parameters that are required. We then update the event, and so one of the important items to see is the fact that it appends to that list. So had there been existing users on that required attendees list, we'd also have all those users included on there too. And then the final optional email just to let Dave know that he's been invited to the Power Virtual Agents event. And so that is the end of the flow. I've also got a blog post if you want to go through this in more detail and see how it's built. Unfortunately, Forms doesn't let you manage the numbers that attend an event. You would have to have an unlimited number of attendees, or potentially take that form down once you reach your limit. The ideal solution for managing limits would be a solution using Power Apps as the form input, and that could then check back with your data source how many spaces were available. Hope you enjoyed that, and any questions, please make sure you leave them below, and as per usual, please like and subscribe. Thanks very much for watching.